Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes. I'm Barry Bryson, and we're going to begin our study of the book of Esther today. Esther is not like any other book in the Old Testament. It is the last of the historical books in the Old Testament, beginning with Joshua. Joshua through Esther takes us 1,000 years of history of God's people. And Esther's the last one. The events of Esther happened somewhere in the years 478, 479 BC, give or take a year, maybe take a year. It didn't happen until after 480 BC, and we'll talk about why we know that later on. Anyway, it describes something that happens among the Jews in the Persian Empire. Because it happened during this time, it happens 50 years after the return from Babylonian captivity. So we need to talk about some dates and the situation, historical situation, before we go any further. So, the northern kingdom went into Assyrian captivity in 722 BC and never made a return, not an organized return, but were scattered to the four winds, although some did come back later on. The southern kingdom of Judah, the tribes Judah and Benjamin, some folks were carried off into captivity in 606 BC by the Babylonians. But 586 BC was when Nebuchadnezzar's army came in because the Jews were intransigent, destroyed the city of Jerusalem, and hauled the population into captivity in Babylon. So that's 586 BC. Now, God told them through the prophet Ezekiel, told them through the prophet Jeremiah specifically, Babylonian captivity is going to happen, but while you're there, I'm going to prosper you. Jeremiah 29. I want you to build houses. I want you to marry. I want you to marry off your kids. I want you to build lives because I have a plan for you. In the first place, I'm going to bring you back. And I have a plan for you, plan to prosper you, to give you a future and a hope. And so they all those who had listened knew this. And that's exactly what happened during Babylonian captivity, which then became Median captivity and then Persian captivity. Through those years of captivity, which spanned, a transition between three empires, they did exactly that, and they reached the highest levels of government. Daniel is a perfect example. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, not quite so high a position, but they reached the level of satraps and viziers. And satrap is a ruler over a satrapy, a province, of which there were 127. Vizier is like a member of the cabinet, the king's cabinet, and that's how high they reached. And so it is during this period of time that Esther is written, but it's written after the return from captivity. In 536 BC, Cyrus the Persian, the grandfather of the king of the book of Esther, who is one of the great men in history. You should do some research on Cyrus. He was such a modern, forward-thinking, tolerant individual, particularly in allowing people to have intellectual freedom and to give people their religious freedom. Cyrus the Persian, in about the second or third year of his reign, let the Jews, but not just the Jews, all the captive peoples that the Babylonians had taken, gave them the freedom to go back to their homelands. Beyond that, he let them take back their cultural heritage, which he did for the Jews. I mean, we've got the list in Ezra and Nehemiah. We got the list of things in Chronicles, the list of the things that they took back that were still there in the treasuries. All the things that they took out of the temple were given back to them. With the invoice. This is what we took. Here it is. And Cyrus did all that. That happened 50 years before the events of the book of Esther. And so there are still Jews all over the Persian Empire, and some of them, like Esther, who becomes queen, and her cousin, uncle Mordecai, who seems to be a highly placed government official himself, have really achieved a high level of status in Persia. Okay. We've got more to say before we get into the text. We're going to talk more about the text and introduce it next time. Thank you for joining for another 5 good minutes with the Word.